welcome. Thanks very much for coming today. So this is the first Ken Loach retrospective in London in 11 years. We present key works, key films from spanning all of his career, with a little bit of emphasis to his earlier work, just because we think that international and younger audiences really know his latest award-winning films, but maybe sometimes miss his earlier groundbreaking work. But tonight, it's a very special event. We are absolutely honored to have with us a titan of British cinema, Mr. Ken Loach. And in the next... yes, please. In the next hour or so, he's going to be talking to us for some of his most controversial and suppressed films, works that TV networks and other institutions have tried to keep from the public. We will discuss The Gamekeeper, The Navigators, the Save the Children Fund film, Which Side Are You On, and A Question of Leadership. Thanks very much. That's from me. The conversation will be hosted by my friend and collaborator, film journalist and programmer and curator, Abla Kandalaft.
Thank you very much, Erifili. A big round of applause for Erifili for having curated this fantastic, much needed season. I'm very, very honoured to be hosting this discussion. I've been watching Mr. Loach's films since I'm going to step into view. There you go. I've been watching Ken Loach's film since I was very, very young. I'm originally from Lebanon myself. And he was very, very respected as a British filmmaker in Lebanon, especially in the leftist circles that my parents were involved with. So really started my love for cinema and set me off on a course to become a film programmer, which I love doing every single day. So, Ken, thank you so much for joining us for this conversation.
It's a real pleasure and very good to see you in the cinema. Always better to see a film in a big screen rather than at home on a link. So thanks for coming. And excuse me if my voice is rather rasping, but I'm struggling for breath a bit these days. So it's breath. Speaking tends to be rather a few words and a deep breath. Okay.
That's absolutely fine. I'm sure everyone understands. Today, we're talking very specifically about some of your work that has been, for various reasons, suppressed or difficult to watch at the time it was made. We're just going to set up the context for this and then move on to the resonance of these films and of censorship today, which is very important.
Yeah.
So 2 of these films are feature films and 3 are documentaries. The feature films saw their distribution curtailed. Can you tell us a bit more about that? So, as I understand it, the distribution in the UK was very difficult, but not so much in other countries. Why was that, do you think?
Well, what happened was it was the end of the 70s, and I had a really good period at the end of the 60s, where I'd managed to make 3 feature films. The Kess, which you saw last night, was the middle one, and clearly, by far the most successful, I think, in terms of a film. And then we did one called Family Life, which was about a girl suffering from the diagnosis of schizophrenia. And after that, that didn't, according to the distributor, it didn't take enough to pay for the usherettes. So on the basis of that, we didn't make another cinema film for 10 years, nearly 10 years. And I did TV for the BBC. Out of that, by the end of that, the BBC weren't really interested. And the next events were really key, political events. In 1979, Margaret Thatcher was elected, and there was a clear shift to the right, which Labour followed, which sounds horribly familiar, doesn't it, to some of us? Anyway, Thatcher had a clear agenda, and it was very hard for us having left BBC not interested, knowing where to go. Tony Garner, the producer, went to America, and I joined the documentary department in Central TV, an independent television company. Now, they had the middle of England was their patch, and the man I worked directly to, a man called Charles Denton, was interested in making feature films, even though they would not get shown in the cinema. They were the equivalent of feature films, and we made the Gamekeeper, and that was it was the next. I'd done 2 more films with Barry Hines, but the Gamekeeper was a book, and I think it's alongside Kess. It's a brilliant book. It's a year in the life of a gamekeeper, and the gamekeeper is a working class man who was a steel worker, and now he's in a job where he's working for the aristocracy, and he keeps out of this beautiful landscape all the people that he worked alongside as a steel worker. And it was the contradiction of class that the Gamekeeper embodied was at the center of the film. But Barry's love for the landscape of South Yorkshire, his love for animals and birds and the countryside is also part of it. So we did that one, but it only went in. It only went in on TV here, but it was accepted in one of the parts of the Cannes Film Festival, and not the main selection, but in one of the smaller selections. And so I went to camera the film, and the film was shown as a cinema film in other countries, particularly France. And the same was true of the Navigators. It was a central TV production, but it was made as a film. It was principally a TV film in Britain because it was central TV, but had some terrific showings in other countries, again, particularly France. So that's why it was like that.
Do you think at the time those themes would have resonated more in continental Europe? In terms of workers organizing, represented on films and so on.
Yes. Well, undoubtedly they did. Because European audiences by and large, have a different attitude to film, and their traditions are different in that the cinema is seen more as with a range as wide as a library, whereas in Britain we are so dominated by American cinema and so dominated by seeing films as a commodity, and not as a communication. And you see that in the critics, in the film critics here. I mean, it's almost, they'll pay lip service to films from other countries, but in terms of importance, it is Hollywood that rules. And you see it in the coverage of the Oscars, as opposed to festivals that cover world cinema. I mean, the Oscars are a celebration of American cinema, with and because we speak the same language, or they think we do, we're allowed in, or British films are allowed in, but foreign languages films are minute, but that's the program that gets all the attention.
Thank you. I want to move on to the documentaries and then to talk about today and the resonance of today.
Okay.
After alongside those two feature films, you've made these 3 shorter documentaries.
Yeah. Sorry. Is it worth saying something about the Navigators? Because it does relate in a way to the documentaries.
Yes.
It is just a wee bit, because I mean, I guess not many people have seen it. I mean, it's a film about the privatization of the railways, and it starts as a comedy, really, with the nonsense of it and the absurdity of it, and the different instructions that were coming down to the railway workers in all the time, saying they have a choice and what they can choose to do. And of course, they had no choice at all. It starts as a comedy, and then gradually the reality of working for private companies and the loss of safety and the battles between different elements of the railway structure, the track as opposed to those running the trains, and the lawyers making money from shifting the blame to the other companies, the reduction in the staff, and all the infrastructure that we used to being dismantled in the interest of profit, and what that does to their friendships, what it does to their sense of self-respect. I mean, to be a railwayman was a badge of pride, and of course it is no longer, or it was then, no longer seen as that. And in the end, they are forced to work in such dangerous conditions that, of course, one gets knocked down by a train. So it had an extraordinary screening in the railway union in Paris, and some people from the RMT went with us because they used it a lot, and that connection was brilliant. You know, we'd show the film. We did several screenings like this, quite a lot. You'd show the film, and then have a political discussion afterwards. So it was a very it was a satisfying film to make, even though here it was a TV film, but it lived as a cinema film, and it had a political content. Sorry.
No, not at all. Indeed, I mean, we are showing the Navigators as part of the season, so hopefully audiences get to watch this film.
Okay.
And it certainly resonates with at least two of the short films, the short documentaries that focus on workers organising in the face of privatization. And something that I found very, very moving, especially in Which Side Are You On, is the focus on creativity in their organising, the focus, the way that everyone in that struggle is very articulate, eloquent, very politically aware, and uses music to kind of bind their community, to further their campaign, etc. So we're moving a little bit off the censorship topic, but I want to touch on that because you talk about humanizing. According to you, where is that today? There are still unions. People are still trying to organize. There are grassroots. We seem to have lost that engagement with politics.
I mean, it relates, where we are today, relates very much to our efforts to, our efforts to tell that story as it was happening in questions of leadership. And that's, as there were 4 films commissioned. Shall I talk about those?
Yes.
I mean, there were 4 films commissioned by Channel 4 with a very simple premise. It was because what had happened, and this is why the Thatcher election is so important. I mean, she had a project to re-establish high profits for private companies, by making labor cheaper. To make labor cheaper, she had to make unions weaker. And she had a three-pronged attack. One was to create mass unemployment, because if there's someone ready to do your job half the money, you're not in a very strong position. Secondly, to provoke strikes that she knew she could win, and she began with the steel workers. And there's a little story about that. And then it was, once she had won, then to put that into law so the unions were permanently weaker. And the three-pronged attack, very clear, military occupation, a military operation. So it went according to her plan, absolutely. Because the union leaders, not the rank and file, the union leaders fell into the pattern that she knew they would. In other words, being right-wing social democrats, they didn't challenge the right of employers to make their profits, however big they were. They tried to do a deal for redundancy. So the consequence was factories closed, and there was a struggle with the left element within the unions, particularly in places like British Leyland, with Red Robbo, if anybody remembers Red Robbo, and my very good friend Alan Thornett at Cowley, and they fought hard. There were factory occupations, and as I say, began with a steel strike. And we, once the pattern became clear, we asked to make Central TV documentary place where I was just employed per film. So I said, can I do a film about the steel strike? It had run its course then, so it was over, and it was very simple. It was a group of people around the table, just talking, telling the story of the strike, and it was very clear that why they were picked. They had the right-wing leadership, Bill Sears, they had no idea how to organise, no tradition of organising, hadn't been on strike since the general strike in 1926. And one of them said, we thought there'd be a book on picketing. And he asked the union leadership, is there a book on picketing? They said, no. And of course there isn't. Just get out and picket. And so that was the depths of their lack of preparedness. And they lost. They've offered a small wage rise, and inflation was run at a very high level. So it was a big wage cut, and they lost. Then she moved on the rest of the unions and the rest of the industries, and she left the miners till last because they were the big ones. They were a strategic industry, a very radical, politically motivated left-wing union with Arthur Scargill as its leader. So don't go for them. Isolate them by defeating all the others. And it's what she did. And we asked, in the wake, we'd made a film about the steel strike. When Central TV saw it, they said, well, we're not going to broadcast this across our network. We're just going to show it on a Sunday afternoon, 4 o'clock. Nobody will watch it because they didn't want to get the hostility of the government. So they reduced that to nothing. Anyway, Channel 4 gave us a commission to do 4 films on the union, on what had happened. And we did it. And it told the story of militancy in the workforce, factory occupations, and the refusal of key unions, particularly the engineers, and particularly Frank Chappell and the electricians, to make certain that the occupations were defeated. You had the union leadership actively, and there was story after story after story, and anecdote after anecdote, and the events proved it. The events proved it, because there were factory closures, and I say unemployment shot through the roof because people had lost their jobs. I mean, that was the story of the films. We made them when they were made. The union leaders we'd attacked got together and said, you cannot show these films. And Frank Chappell played a leading role. The AU leaders played a leading role. They spoke to the chair of Channel 4, who were going to broadcast them, who was a right-wing Labour who had joined the SDP. The SDP was a breakaway right-wing party for the Labour Party. Social Democrat, Shirley Williams, and the bloke who became Foreign Secretary, I forget his name. And so you had the union leaders who were criticised. You had the head of Channel 4, who was absolutely close to them politically. He said, and we don't want it. And the board of Central TV, there was another right-wing Labour politician who had been Solicitor General under Labour. And between them, they said, and it took a year, they said, we will not broadcast these programs. And it was the story that was exposed the reason for Thatcher's success. And there's one more thing to add to that. When Kinnock and Hatherley, the leaders of the Labour Party, they knew exactly what Margaret Thatcher's plan was. They knew exactly. I mean, she'd set it out. You know, in everything she'd said, no surprise. They were going to privatize public services. They were going to, including the NHS, and they began to do it. And everything that we have experienced since then was on the cards. And there was no support in those issues from the Labour Party. And then we got to Question of Leadership. Those 4 films, they're not good films in terms of cinema. I mean, they're not good films, I have to say. You watch them today and you think, oh my God, they're tedious. But actually, for a historian, they're quite good. But in film terms, they're not very good. Now, do you want to go on to talk about Question of Leadership?
Which side are you on?
Which side are you on?
Yeah.
I mean, that was the big one.
Yes.
So the banning of Questions of Leadership happened in 1983. The miners, they'd been left till last. They were now isolated. They were in 1984. And we knew there was a big strike coming up. And it happened. And I tried everywhere to get a commission for a film about the strike. Nobody would touch it with a barge pole. I mean, the TV had swung to the right. And Channel 4 even advertised for right-wing producers. They had an advert for right-wing producers. That's how intense it got. And then eventually, the miners were provoked by the government through its mandate, because the mines were publicly owned, and through a government-appointed head of the coal board, he purposely broke the agreement with the union. There would be no pit closures without consultation. He closed a pit knowing that the miners had to go on strike or admit defeat. There was no choice. If they bid that, then he could go through the industry, closing what he wanted, imposing whatever he wanted. It was. I mean, he threw the glove down. It was the gauntlet to challenge them to strike. And militant union, popular union, miners were popular because of the danger of their job and the history of disasters and deaths. Very popular. And that was the struggle. And it began in 1984 with this with this challenge from the government, and they went on strike. And of course, there was great support from the rank and file trade unionists, great support from the people who were sympathetic in local towns, cities, communities, and the miners were heroic, and their wives played a huge role. The miners' wives were legendary, and of course the Kinnick and Hattersley, interestingly, turned their fire on Arthur Scargill, not on Thatcher, on Arthur Scargill. They said perhaps there could have been a different way to do this. That was as far as they went, criticising Thatcher. And what is interesting about that, and it relates to today, when the Labour leadership had to choose between the organised, militant working class and those who will protect the interests of capital, they chose the interests of capital against the organised working class. And we've seen that over and over again. There and now Starmer. And that's the thread, that's the worm in the bud of the apple of Labour Party. It's a contradiction they will never resolve. So anyway, finally I got a commission. It was ITV. They had a program called the South Bank Show, which was cultural, and I knew the bloke who ran it, who was the front man, Melvin Bragg, and we'd been students. He was a bit younger than me, but he was a student at the same time, and we'd known each other. So I said, "Look, Melvin, there's been a huge cultural explosion. If it'd been the gardening program, I would have talked about the allotments. But anyway, it was a huge cultural explosion in the strike. People are writing poems, people are writing songs, people have extraordinary stories to tell, and they're embedded in their writings. How can you resist? If this was in South America, you do several programs about it." And anyway, he said he would do it. And we did it, shot it in a week in August, ran about all over the country. And it's a much better film than Question of Leisure. Not saying it's great, but it's better than the others. And I mean, it was inspirational. When we stood on the picket lines and we saw the police putting £5 notes in their vans as they went past because they were on overtime. And we heard their stories of the miners and their wives, and all in a week. And we used some footage that amateur cameras had shot at the big battle of Orgreave and various other occasions, and it was brutal. It was brutal, and it was clear who was beating up who. It was clear the violence. And of course, we did it, we put it together very quickly. And of course, a lot of what they were talking about was the violence of the police. And the film ends with the last 10 minutes or so is the violence of the police. And we put it and interwove it with comments and poems and things. And then that was the end of the film. And when it was cut, Melvin and his boss, I later discovered, well, I discovered at the time, was they came to see it, and there was silence at the end, and the man who was over Melvin said, "Well, I'm afraid we're not going to show that." And I said, "Why not?" He said, "Well, we can't show the police beating people, miners up." I said, "Why not?" They said, "Well, it's just not, we can't show it." There was no explanation. I said, "Well, if this was in South America, you'd make a whole huge fuss of it." No, well, we can't show it. And they didn't. And eventually, it managed to get into a festival in Italy in much later, around about Christmas, and they showed it. And because they knew it had been banned, they gave it a little award, and because of that, went back to Channel 4, and they finally showed it right at the end of just before the strike ended, and they showed it, and the week after, they had another program where it was a face-to-camera talk by one of the leaders, who was Jimmy Reed, who had led the Upper Clyde shipbuilders, and he attacked Arthur Scargill for a straight half hour in order to balance our pictures of the police beating up miners. And had one conversation on air, on Channel 4. They had a right to reply program, and the head of Northumberland Police said, "I object to this program because when you show the miners, the police with their batons, you've added a sound to the when they hit the miners." And he said, "That's out of order." And I said, "Well, you tell me, Chief Constable, what does it sound like when a policeman hits a miner over the head?" And he said, "Well, that's anyway." It was a lot. I mean, it was out of, it was clearly ridiculous. And anyway, so that was it. And we've been able to show that ever since, really, and have the copyright, I think, to it now. So that's me. Anyway, sorry, I've talked far too much, but I mean, they are all linked. So anyway.
Not at all. Not at all. It's very good to have this context. I just want to ask one last question about which side are you on, and then I'll move to Save the Children, and then I'll open it up to the audience. With which side are you on? Were you surprised by the reaction of Melvin Bragg and his boss, and by the fact that it was very they had attempted to censor it, given that it was clear what was happening. It was clear that the miners have fallen victim to police violence. What was your reaction at the time?
Well, I think, I mean, when you're in the middle of making a film, I mean, you're so engrossed in it and so determined to make it as strong as you possibly could. And given that the whole coverage of the strike was so blatantly against the miners, there was never suggestion in the BBC and the ITV that the police were violent. The story was picket line violence, and respected reporters like Kate Adie. I remember her one day saying, talking about picket line violence. That was the phrase in the news. Never mind opinions. And normally, if you get a story and you've got evidence, there's no question. And I was, I guess, still learning. I was old to learn, but you're always shocked when you're in the middle of something and you look at it and you say, well, they can't refuse it because there it is, and there's the experience, and there was experience over and over and over again, and it was, I think the subheading of the film was poems and songs from the miners' strike, or something like that. And that's what it was. And we thought, well, they can't. It's there. How can you refuse it? But refuse it, they did. And they covered themselves up right at the end when the strike was defeated. They finally put it out.
Thank you. Moving on to, there's loads more I would love to say, but I'm aware of the time.
Sorry. Sorry, my phone.
Once it's not me. BBC. It's not the BBC, we're okay. I wanted to move on to Save the Children.
Yeah.
This is quite close to my heart. I found it incredibly cathartic to watch, because it's very rare that we get a takedown of NGOs and the ethos behind NGOs and why they're there in the first place. So could you take us through what went through your mind? It's a bit of a glib question, but because it's so it's so you'll watch the film, and in the film Ken films people in Kenya talking about Save the Children and talking about aid and NGOs. And they are very, very savvy, very articulate about why these exist and why they are being handed out this aid. So what was your thought process?
Well, it was a journey of discovery, really. It was after Cass, we saw, 14-year-old boy having a hard time. And they said, you're the man to tell the story of the Save the Children Fund and all the good work we do. So we entered into it and just thought, well, this could be interesting. And when we started to look into what the work they did, it just got more and more horrifying, because it was clearly a case of a kind of neocolonialism, where the old imperialist way of marching in and taking control, clear control, political control, was disappearing. So they had to find other ways of control. And it was controlled by setting up schools, by presenting the British as benevolent, as bringers of health and knowledge and learning and a path to success, and a very favorable picture of the people who had exploited them. And we showed a family in Britain who had taken kids from the north and given them holidays, and it was a lower middle class family, and they were doing it as they thought as an act of kindness, but they were so patronizing to the kids. I mean, they don't know how to hold a knife and fork. I think they were, how to use a bath. I mean, horrible, horrible patronizing, doing good, the worst kind of doing good in a supercilious manner. So they were bad enough. And then we went to Kenya, and obviously a researcher went in front of us, and she found this extraordinary school run by a headmaster who I think had been in the military. And it was after the Kenyan independence, and the independence movement was called the Mau Mau. And it's now transpired there were terrible concentration camps, terrible torture and punishment from the Brits against the Mau Mau. I mean, really crimes, massive crimes, terrible crimes, physical punishment, and I say torture. And now that's notorious now. But of course, we didn't know this whenever it was, 1970, I think we made it. And so we went to this school, and there was a Black American teacher, and he became our voice. And you went to school, it was like a British public school. The libraries at the school were full of, what an English public schoolboy would read. Biggles, the hero of a devastating pilot in the Second World War, and his triumphant adventures. They wore blazers. They had to salute the flag, and no African clothes were allowed. They couldn't wear African clothes. They were dressed like English public school boys. These are black kids off the streets of Nairobi. So it was to turn bright kids into a middle class who could rule Kenya on behalf of the British investors. It was a clear class project, and this American teacher was horrified. I mean, he bought an African shirt in the market, and he was told by the headmaster, take that off immediately. In Africa, take it off. And the rumor was the head had shot more members of the Mau Mau than anybody else he knew, with his own gun, a kind of freelance volunteer to oppress the Kenyans. And of course, we saw the huge poverty, and this isolated British public school with black kids thinking they'd won something, when in fact they were turned into pro-British, with all the understanding of the British ruling class and sympathy towards them. That's what, and a pleasure to work with them because they gave you things, and that's the and of course when we finally showed it, the man who commissioned it was apoplectic. He was I mean, I was much younger then. He was apoplectic with rage, and stormed out and said, "You will hear more of this." And they immediately they sent for a van, and they took all, because they took all the films, all the trims, everything we'd shot. They just put it in the van, took it away, and we thought, well, London Weekend Television, who had made it, they must stand by us. And we rang them, and we'd been beaten to it by the head of Save the Children. And it transpired, this is classic, it transpired that the head of Save the Children went to the same public school as the head of LWT. So, of course, there was a bit of, old boy network, and the film was never seen again. And it must be 50 odd years after that, we finally managed to get a screening, but it's not complete. I mean, it's not dubbed. It's just a cut that is, we thought we'd probably make a few changes, but it's more or less what we wanted, but no sound mix or anything. So anyway, there you go. That was a lesson to us. Say we were young and, tangled with the British ruling class, and they will be urbane. They'll take a joke. They're self-deprecating, but when they're threatened, my God, you better watch out. And that was them.
Well, the audience has a chance to watch that film now. After it was last screened only in 2011, was it at the BFI? So a very, very special screening. I'm aware people really want to ask questions, so I don't want to take up too much of anyone's time, including yours. We've got one question at the back.
Yep.
Good evening, Mr. Loach. It's a real honor to be there in your virtual presence tonight. My name is Pierre. I'm a French citizen. And I watched a few of your movies during my teenage years, and I'm 35 now. And I'm wondering, with all the topics that you've covered, the working class, the religion problems, the Irish conditions with the wind that shakes the barley. If you were to make another movie within the next few years, or if you were 30 years old again, what topic or what movie would you like to make?
I don't know. It's very difficult. I mean, I think there are opportunities that have been missed. In one respect, there's so many, I mean, at the time, we've always tried to work on a story that we felt had to be told. I think you've got to feel this has to be told in one form or another as best we can, and so it's difficult to answer that. And one thing that I would have liked to have touched on, but I'm not qualified to do it, and I realised that I think some years ago, but that would be to do a film about Palestine, and because I think that has been the cause of the last, since the Second World War, really. which was the big cause against fascism, the plight of the Palestinians, and the way the world turns its back on them, and the genocide that is now happening, and the position of our government in contributing to the genocide, contributing to the weapons, breaking the law in its refusal to fulfill its legal obligations under the Genocide Convention. The sheer hypocrisy of that, and we'll maybe talk more about that maybe later. And every day, the hypocrisy gets worse. Even the incident about Aston Villa. I mean, this is a country, Israel. When the last time I looked at a map, it's in North Africa. It's not in Europe. What's it doing playing European football? It's committing a genocide that every authoritative body in the world that has spoken has agreed that, and yet the mass media pretend to ignore that. There's some moral equivalence between those who have suffered genocide and those who have committed it, and somehow there's some moral equivalence between them. They talk about the hurt on both sides and all that, and it's I think that the hypocrisy in that and the collusion in genocide is something that has really shocked, I think, a lot of people. And there's the details of how that hypocrisy is expressed in our news coverage is it pays some careful attention. Anyway, I think if there was one story I would have, and I think Paul Laverty I work with, have done for 30 years. I think we both feel it, but we're not. You have to have some idea of the language, and I'm just not qualified. So it's one I hope others will do.
Thank you very much for that response. Yes, we have a question there, backward. Thank you.
I'm going to be very naughty because I'm not actually going to ask a question, but I think I'll be forgiven because I'm sure I speak for everyone when I say thank you for everything you've done, Ken.
Oh, well. You're very kind. And, it's not me, it's a team. We're a gang. It's a team. And, we should talk about the writer and, amazing people in all aspects. And it only works as a team. And, so on behalf of the collective, thanks very much.
Well said. Do we have any more questions, comments? Yes, right in the front row. Thank you.
Seconding that, Ken. Thank you for everything. Absolutely. I'm thinking a lot lately about, I feel like there's a really exciting new movement of filmmakers taking up the fight that you are fighting. You've got a handful of ones that come to mind are like Scrapper by Charlotte Reagan, or you had the really wonderful On Falling, Laura Carrera, which you and your team helped to produce, or the really wonderful one that I saw a couple of months ago, Lollipop by Daisy Mae Hudson. A lot of resonances with, especially Daniel Blake, I felt, and sort of what you were doing there. But something that's a bit different about the context of those films compared to sort of your own work and that kind of thing is that these filmmakers are all very much making their films from at least some kind of position of lived experience of what they're making their films about. And that seems to be like the currency out there at the minute, is you can get your film made if you're to some extent telling your own story and that kind of thing. And that's very much, as you say, you've always looked for the stories that need to be told. They're not necessarily a story about Ken Loach in any particular way. And so I guess I'm just curious about your own position on that kind of binary between filmmakers like yourself who maybe operate a bit more like a reporter and you're telling other people's stories, you're telling stories about other contexts that aren't your own, versus people where they're, especially for debut feature films, they're having to sort of find their way into the industry by kind of putting themselves out there on the line, telling their own stories in that kind of way. And then also, to my knowledge, you've never made a film about Nuneaton, where you were born. And was that ever something that was on the cards? Was there ever a story that you wanted to tell there, or was there a sort of hesitance to put Ken Loach at the own films?
No, it's I mean, they're two good points, really. The first one is, I mean, I hadn't thought of the new filmmakers coming up in that way. That it is they have to tell their own story. I mean, I think the lack of support for independent films is really a real. Well, it goes back to what I was trying to say earlier, that films here are seen as commodities, and the money that the BFI get is a minimal, and it goes back to a failure of cinemas to book, because you've got to have a possible audience in order to make the films, to get the investment, and if you can get and a reasonable chance of getting it shown. And I think if you know the chance of getting it shown are minimal, no one will invest, because the money just never comes back. So I think that's a huge problem. It's a problem of distribution and exhibition. But I think it's a long, the way we've tried to work is, I mean, I hate labels, so I wouldn't use the word social realism. It drives me mad. You just set out to make a film and tell a story. But the way of, that observational style, for me, goes back to the Czech cinema of the 60s, and that, the quiet observer is sympathetic or empathetic, with understanding, but not neutral, just making contact with the people in the film, understanding them, trying to understand them. And so I think I think that way of making films, in a way, was of its time. And it may well be there's, people advance things. I mean, we tried to push it further in some ways, and people now will try and push it further. Otherwise, of course, that's the way art develops, films develop. But I think it's the idea that you should have to, you have to have suffered what you're going to put on screen is just a very crude way of looking at how you work, how you tell stories. Doesn't apply anywhere else. Doesn't apply in writing. Charles Dickens didn't do all the things he writes about. Silly. But the key is people need I don't think there should be a publicly owned cinema in every town and city, and available and easy and a pleasure to go to, and should be programmed by people who care about films, love films of all kinds, and then a special channel to develop our own independent films with a view of sharing our experiences in cinemas. So the Nuneaton, it's interesting. I've thought about it a lot. When we were doing Daniel Blake, about the man who's entitled to benefits, and the system makes it impossible for him to claim them. And the first place we went to was Nuneaton, because I had a good contact in a charity there, and she gave us a way in to meet a lot of people, and it was fantastic. And but I've always been drawn to cities and areas where there's a strong sense of identity that is apparent, whether it's in the language, like South Yorkshire, Liverpool, Northeast, Manchester, the old industrial heartlands, Glasgow, where there's a struggle and a tradition of militancy. And the Nuneaton is caught between the West Midlands and the East, between Birmingham and Leicester. The language is, my mother was from Gloucestershire, and hers was a voice that wasn't local. So, sorry. So it was. It's a difficult language difficult accent to pin down, really, and I didn't. If it's a strong culture, you get it's a cushion you can rely on. I mean, some accents are very good for comedy. South Yorkshire, obviously, Liverpool, obviously, the North has stronger identities. And when we came to choose somewhere, neither Paul nor I could see the value, other than a personal one, of going back to Nuneaton. The people are terrific. It's and the situations were good, but people are somehow not as forthcoming, and they don't have that easy way of telling a joke or having a strong presence. And in the end, it came down to that. But it's somewhere I follow the football team every week, and even though it's been in hard times, and I still have friends there, and I go back as often as I can. But it feels a mistake not to have made a film there. It really does. So it's a difficult thing to answer that, because I know I should have made a film there.
Thank you for that question. There's a question at the back.
Good evening, Mr. Loach. Another Frenchman in the room. So you've got an audience in France, definitely. I saw thanks to the Garden Cinema, by the way, which is an amazing venue, I have to say. They started in Mike Lee, I think, whole Mike Lee, and now it's you. I mean, it gets only better. But I saw the documentary Versus, which was broadcasted here about your life. And I remember 3 words or 3 expressions. You talked about vulnerability as a key component for actors you are looking for. You talk about cowardice, and you say cowardice is a choice, and you end with 1 word, which is bastards. And you start with the same word in the document, the editing. So I wondered how would you say these 3 expressions summarize your career and your choices? And how did you come with the 3rd one, which I'm not going to repeat? And when did you decide to make it kind of a driving force in your work? Because it sounds that's
well, I think it's no, I think I hope there's a few more enticing words I could choose. One was vulnerability is about acting, and you did need a lot of qualities, and we look for a number of qualities. And one is vulnerability. One is a presence that people can read when they watch the film. That you someone you care about, someone you laugh with, someone you share their sorrows, someone you feel angry with, someone you understand, and someone you want to watch. So all those things, and vulnerability is a key element in that. So it has to do with acting. The second one, cowardice is, I think that's political. I think. There's a great quote by the American bass baritone singer Paul Robeson, who was active in the 40s and 50s, I think. maybe even earlier. And he was a very great singer and very political. And he said, and if I can remember it, artists are the gatekeepers of truth. They are civilization's conscience. Artists are the gatekeepers of truth, civilization's conscience. And I think that can be true, should be true. I mean, I think that if we have a platform at all, or any way of connecting with people, that's our obligation. That's our deal. That's the responsibility we have. And I think, I mean, certainly in the 60s, film directors, to be precise, were much more outspoken. It was seen as good commitment. It was a quality people looked for in artists and amongst filmmakers. Well, now you don't hear a peep. You don't hear a peep. I think Jonathan Glazer was a very brave man when his film he won an Oscar, and he made clear what the film was about, and it was about today. It wasn't about the war. And I think a brave man, and of course he took huge abuse for that, but a brave man. A lot of others are cowards, and they know they can see it. You'll have the same conversation, but will they speak out? Not likely. So I think cowardice is, because also if you do put your head above the parapet, and there aren't many heads up there, yours is the one that gets shot off. And so the more of us there are, the stronger we are. And there's some very brave people, but there's a lot of people who choose silence, and that weakens everyone. Fast as well, we all know who they are, and it's they line up to be called that, don't they? So have a glass after we've finished, and we'll toast to the downfall of bastards.
Thank you very much. Any more questions in the audience? Comments?
Hi, Ken. I'm just really curious to know what you think is the future of the left. I mean
The future
of the left politically. Is the Labour Party over? Should we just completely abandon it now, as we see the progressive infiltration of the right through the years that you mentioned earlier? I'm just thinking, is it time to just let go of the Labour Party? Is it over? And do we now embrace your party, the Green Party? What do you think is the future of the left politically?
Oh my God! Well, this is a big question. I'm sure we've all got thoughts on this. I mean, I think the Labour Party is caught in this contradiction, and always has been. The Prime Minister at the time of the general strike walked away from it, did exactly what Kinnock did in the miners' strike, walked away, Ramsay MacDonald. And they're caught in this contradiction that they're meant to represent the interests of the working class, Labour, clues in the name, represent the interests of the working class. But they support a system, and their system for doing that is to tax the rich and give them restrictions. In order to tax them, then capitalism has to succeed. If capitalism succeeds, then you can tax them their profits. If capitalism succeeds, it does so by exploiting the working class. Well, they're meant to represent their interests against exploitation. But they have a system which demands their exploitation. So they're caught in this contradiction, and they can never escape. I mean, I remember back in the 70s, I think, and Wilson and Callaghan, they had in place of strife, and a price and incomes policy. It was meant to do precisely that, restrict the profits of capital, and impose a £6 wage limit increase across the board, whatever your income, to the workers, £6 a week extra, as a rise. But the big companies and corporations said, well, this doesn't work for us because we've got to make profit, and if we make a smaller profit than our competitor, we go out of business. It can't work. And of course, it didn't work, and they took no notice. And of course, they can't, because that's implicit in their system. So in a way, if you support Labour, you must do it knowing that this is a contradiction and that it will fail. The future of the left should be a radical socialist party based on common ownership, democratic control, planned economy, not planned in what people want to eat and things. Planned in a strategic sense, but allowing obviously choice and small companies and corner shops. Obviously, there's a balance, but essentially and strategically, there's a plan which we need if we are to control the environment, and that has to be international. We've been through the socialism in one country and seen where that's led. So it's a huge argument, and the present attempts to found a new party, which some of us have been involved in, are struggling. It's pretty mildly. The old habits amongst some comrades, organisers, die very hard, and the simple things like unity and comradeship are hard to find sometimes. But the historic opportunity and the political necessity have never been clearer. We have the Labour Party is at such a low level of popularity. The issue of Palestine and Gaza has united hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people to be a broad basis for a new party, as well as, of course, the great social issues of poverty, housing, and insecurity at work and all the rest. So it is a massive opportunity for a properly ideologically socialist party. And if the left fails, as it has failed before, it is a massive failure by the left. If it can get through, it could be a turning point. But I'm knocking on a bit now, and so I don't have much patience because I want to see it before I kick the bucket. But who knows? Anyway, we'll look. Let's hope it's not a very political thing to say, but let's hope to God they see sense, and we can have a decent party we can all support.
That's actually a really nice note to end it on. Time is up, so you guys very well. I want everyone to give Mr. Ken Loach a huge round of applause, not least of all for taking the time to speak to us today.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And of course, the decade of exceptional filmmaking and storytelling. Did you have any last words you wanted to share with us?
Very simply. Coming out of that last question, we have a huge opportunity now, and it needs everyone to get their shoulders to the wheel and make something of it. And I think it begins with a proper. Well, you say read the books, know the history of our movement, learn the lessons, learn the right lessons, and we can get there. The people the working class, they have all the strength. We don't need people to rip us off, and we can do it. We can do it. We just need a strong leadership that understands the strategic necessities of strategic aims, and it can be done. So let's do it, folks. We really need it now. Anyway, good to see you. Thanks for coming, and solidarity.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Abla.
Thank you. Absolute pleasure speaking with you.
Okay, all the
Thank you
best.
so much, and you.
Okay, bye-bye.